The first time the palace doors hissed open for me, I honestly thought someone had activated a giant automatic trash compactor, and that I was about to become a diplomatic pancake. But the warrior beside me didn't flinch. Her long ears angled slightly, catching every echo, every shift of force field pressure, every mutter of courtiers who clearly wondered why a human was being allowed anywhere near the royal inspection. I tried to walk with confident steps, but the floor tiles glowed in rhythmic pulses that reacted to my footsteps. And for a terrifying moment, I thought I'd triggered an alarm until she whispered that this was normal and not, in fact, the prelude to my immediate execution. She kept one armored hand close to her weapon, the gesture subtle but unmistakably protective, and I tried not to feel flattered, because feeling flattered in an alien palace usually meant you'd misunderstood something and were about to die in a very diplomatic way. As we approached the throne platform, the queen's gaze tightened, her eyes narrowing the moment she saw me standing exactly where no human was supposed to stand, and I could practically feel the warrior tense beside me, as though she were bracing for gravity to reverse, or for me to trip into interstellar history as the first human to face plant before a monarch. The Queen's inspection line glimmered with hovering data slates orbiting in slow spirals, each projecting tactical summaries and genetic verifications, all meant to streamline the ceremony, though I suspected most of it existed just to intimidate newcomers. I tried to imitate the warrior's posture, which turned out to be impossible because I was fairly certain her spine had been reinforced with alloy rods that kept her perfectly upright, while my own spine seemed to have suddenly turned into warm noodles. Her long ears, flexible and expressive, tilted forward in a disciplined angle that signaled absolute readiness, while mine unfortunately were not long, expressive, or disciplined at all. I stood very still, mostly because I didn't trust myself to move without knocking something over. The queen descended the steps of her dais with regal precision, her gaze skimming past everyone only to stop sharply on the warrior at my side. Then her eyes flicked to me with an expression I interpreted as either bewilderment or the universal parental face of, "What in the galaxies are you doing with my daughter's most valued soldier?" Her voice carried through the hall like a laser-guided command. She ordered the warrior to remove her helmet, the words crisp, the expectation absolute. Every guard straightened. Every data slate paused in its spiral. Even the ambient hum of the palace seemed to hold its breath. The warrior lifted her hands to comply, and I felt a strange tightening in my chest, though I couldn't explain why. But instead of obeying, she froze mid-motion. I felt the air shift around us. Her long ears flicked once, betraying a crack in her composure, and she shifted subtly so her armored shoulder angled protectively toward me. The queen's eyes widened, not with anger but with stunned confusion, as though she just witnessed a gravitational anomaly opening in her own throne room. I wasn't sure whether to salute, bow, or apologize for existing, so I settled on a very still sort of breathing that I hoped looked respectful rather than terrified. The warrior didn't speak. She didn't move. The queen didn't repeat her order. The silence stretched like a force field locking into place, trapping all three of us in a triad of unspoken revelations that I didn't fully understand but could feel pressing on my skin. Other dignitaries began exchanging glances loaded with political calculation, clearly sensing something monumental had just shifted, though I doubted any of them knew exactly what. A guard coughed, or maybe that was his armor resetting its posture protocols. Either way, it sounded uncomfortably loud. I wished desperately for a handbook titled "So You Accidentally Caused a Major Interstellar Incident." Here, what to do next, but no such manual existed, at least not in any language I could read. The warrior's hand slowly lowered from her helmet, her voice catching on the air in a way I'd never heard before, almost as if she were afraid the next word might detonate something fragile. The queen stepped closer, studying both of us with a careful, dissecting intensity that made me wonder if she could somehow hear heartbeats. because mine was definitely broadcasting panic at a frequency that might have been detectable from orbit. She seemed to weigh countless possibilities before her gaze shifted again to her soldier. Something changed in her expression, something small but significant, like the flicker of a star at the moment when its gravity wavers. I felt a warmth at my side as the warrior breathed out slowly, as though she'd made a decision she hoped wouldn't unravel her entire life. The queen's silence deepened until it bordered on a cosmic force of its own. And in that moment, standing in a hall of shining circuits, humming cores, watchful eyes, and a warrior who refused a queen's order for reasons I didn't yet grasp, I understood that destiny had just turned sharply toward us, and none of us were ready for the direction it chose. The corridor doors sealed behind us with a soft chime that sounded far too cheerful for two people who had just survived a silent standoff with an imperial queen. I walked beside the warrior, trying to match her stride, though she moved with the kind of smooth confidence that suggested her joints had built-in gyroscopes while mine did not. Her long ears angled back in a way that suggested deep concentration, or possibly deep irritation, though I hoped it wasn't the second one because I had already caused enough diplomatic distress for an entire solar cycle. We moved through the palace's starlit passageways, each lined with panels that displayed shifting constellations in real time, a detail I might have admired if my brain weren't busy replaying the moment she refused the queen's command. I finally worked up the courage to whisper, asking why she didn't remove her helmet, and she gave me a sideways glance that felt like it could slice through reinforced hull plating. She muttered something about timing, implications, and the queen's unexpected reaction, which I pretended to understand even though I grasped only about 5% of it, and hoped the remaining 95% was, because of you, human. A small drone drifted down from the ceiling as though drawn by the scent of anxiety, projecting a holographic prompt asking us to rate our royal inspection experience from 1 to 5 stars. I nearly choked, and she stared at it so long the drone began playing an upbeat waiting tune. She eventually dismissed it with a swipe that sent it careening into a wall, where it beeped in offended indignation before recalibrating itself. As we continued, she kept glancing over her shoulder, ears twitching with restless precision, and when I asked what she was listening for, she told me the palace's internal surveillance spheres were behaving strangely, shifting patterns, narrowing focus on us. I tried to come up with a reassuring comment, but the only thing that came out of my mouth was a suggestion to walk faster, which somehow made her laugh under her breath, a sound I wasn't prepared for and definitely wasn't emotionally stable enough to process in the moment. We reached a platform where a transport pod waited, its doors sliding open with a glow of soft blue light. Inside, floating seats adjusted themselves to accommodate our weight, though mine adjusted far too enthusiastically, nearly flipping me upside down before stabilizing. She ignored my flailing, which was probably for the best. Once the pod launched, gliding through the palace's internal transit tubes, I watched the swirling lights of data streams rushing alongside us. She leaned back, arms crossed, helmet still sealed, and said the queen's silence meant far more than anger. It meant confusion, calculation, perhaps even recognition of something she wasn't ready to confront. I asked if that something was me, and she made a sound somewhere between a sigh and a reluctant admission. The pod chimed an alert, announcing that our destination had been changed by authorized override, which neither of us had requested. She stiffened immediately, ears lifting sharply, and told me to brace myself. I asked if she meant emotionally or physically, and she replied, both, which was absolutely not comforting. When the pod finally stopped, we stepped out into a chamber glowing with crimson diagnostics, where the Queen's advisor awaited us with a smile that suggested he had never once smiled sincerely in his entire life. He circled us like a malfunctioning orbiting moon, asking pointed questions about loyalty, protocol, and the nature of our unexpected partnership. a phrase he delivered with all the subtlety of a plasma explosion. The warrior maintained her cold composure, answering only with strict formalities, while I tried not to ruin everything by existing too loudly. The advisor's drone scanned us repeatedly, humming with suspicious enthusiasm, and one of them kept poking my face as though searching for signs of corruption or idiocy. It probably found plenty of both. The warrior subtly shifted closer, her presence suddenly a protective barrier between me and whatever political firestorm was brewing. After the interrogation, the advisor dismissed us with a smile sharp enough to draw blood, and the moment we were out of earshot, she grabbed my wrist and pulled me into a maintenance corridor I was fairly certain was not intended for diplomatic personnel. She told me the advisor's questions confirmed her fear. Someone within the palace wanted the queen destabilized, and my involvement provided the perfect spark. I pointed out that being used as a spark wasn't ideal for humans, as sparks tended to explode or burn out, and she told me not to worry in a tone that was absolutely not comforting. We continued deeper into the dim passageways, guided only by her instincts and the faint flicker of diagnostic lights that seemed strangely out of sync. Every step felt like we were descending into the skeleton of the palace itself, far from the politics above, far from the queen's silence, and far closer to whatever truth was waiting for us in the circuitry-lit dark. Her voice lowered as she admitted she didn't freeze before the queen because of fear or disobedience alone. She froze because something about the queen's reaction made her realize that our fates had just become entangled in a way neither of us had chosen, and neither of us could easily escape. I opened my mouth to ask what that meant, but before I could, a series of lights flickered ahead, forming a pattern her eyes widened at in shock. She whispered that it was a coded warning used only during internal threats of the highest order. I felt my stomach drop. She reached for her weapon. I reached for absolutely nothing because I had no weapon, no plan, and no idea how to survive an escalating alien conspiracy. And together, with humor fading into tension and tension curling into something even larger, we stepped toward the signal glowing like a heartbeat in the dark. The warning lights pulsed in a sequence that made the warrior's long ears stiffen, and when she whispered that the code hadn't been used in generations, I did what any brave human would do. I took one cautious step behind her and pretended it was a tactical decision. The corridor opened into a chamber deep beneath the palace, its walls alive with threads of glowing circuitry that seemed to breathe with their own quiet intelligence. At the center stood a console projecting a hologram of the entire Imperial network, but the display flickered with distortions that looked uncomfortably intentional. She stepped closer, scanning the patterns, and murmured that someone had rerouted control of the surveillance spheres, the advisor's queries suddenly fitting into a puzzle that made far too much sense. I tried to help by pointing out the big red blinking part of the projection, and she actually smiled, only for a second, but long enough to steady something in my chest I hadn't realized was wobbling. Before either of us could examine the system further, a door behind us hissed open and the queen entered, flanked by two guards who looked like they'd swallowed steel rods. For a wild moment I wondered if she'd come to arrest us, but her gaze swept over the corrupted hologram with a cold fury that wasn't aimed at us. She dismissed the guards with a flick of her hand, leaving only the three of us in the humming glow. The warrior stiffened, clearly preparing for reprimand, but the queen surprised both of us by addressing her with a tone that held neither anger nor accusation, only a weary understanding. She admitted the advisor had been feeding her false reports for months, manipulating her decisions, isolating her from key information. She had suspected treachery, but the moment her warrior froze in the throne room, shielding a human of all things, was the moment she realized she had underestimated the threat. I cleared my throat, gently reminding everyone that I was still present and still very fragile. The queen assessed me, perhaps reevaluating my usefulness, and asked why I had been drawn into this. I admitted with great dignity that I had absolutely no idea and had mostly been trying not to die. The warrior stepped forward, stating firmly that it wasn't my fault. She'd chosen to protect me because she sensed danger converging on us, and because something in the Queen's reaction felt like a truth she had to confront rather than obey. The Queen studied her with an expression that softened in a way I couldn't quite decipher. She revealed that the advisor's influence had grown so insidious that even she had doubted her own instincts, until that silent moment when her soldier refused the command. It had shaken her enough to break the spell of certainty she'd been trapped in. We turned back to the corrupted console, and the warrior explained the sabotage threading through the palace systems. The Queen listened, then placed her hand on the interface, her presence overriding multiple layers of locked protocols. The chamber's lights flared as she initiated an imperial purge that swept through the network like a cleansing storm. I held my breath as the hologram flickered, warped, then finally stabilized, revealing dozens of hidden commands the advisor had used to manipulate events across the empire. The Queen's jaw tightened when she saw the extent of it. She issued an order through the system, her voice slicing cleanly through the interface, commanding the advisor's immediate arrest. The warrior let out a slow exhale, the tension easing from her shoulders, and when she turned to me, there was something different in her eyes, gratitude, maybe, or the realization that our strange alliance had somehow shifted into something far deeper. I joked weakly that humans apparently made excellent catalysts for constitutional crises, and she laughed softly, the sound warm in the cool, humming chamber. The Queen watched us, then nodded with a small, knowing smile that felt like an unexpected blessing. When we eventually returned to the throne room, the palace felt different, lighter, clearer, as though its circuits had begun breathing freely again. Officials whispered updates about the advisor's capture, guards hurried to restore order, and for once, no surveillance sphere hovered aggressively near my face. The Queen stood before her court and addressed her people with a steadiness that commanded the room. She acknowledged the infiltration, vowed transparency, and thanked those who had acted with loyalty, including the warrior who had dared to refuse her command. The court murmured in shock, but the Queen silenced them with a single raised hand. Then she turned toward me, and my heart nearly evacuated my body. She announced that the presence of a human had not been a breach, but the very proof that her empire needed to reevaluate old assumptions. She declared that my role, however accidental, had revealed the truth. I tried to bow gracefully, failed spectacularly, and nearly toppled over. The warrior caught me by the elbow before I hit the tiles, and a ripple of amused laughter rolled through the hall. Later, when the palace finally quieted and we stood on a balcony overlooking the starlit city, the warrior removed her helmet at last. Her long ears caught the breeze, her expression unguarded in a way I had never seen. She told me I de-changed her, forced her to confront the limits of her obedience, reminded her that loyalty meant more than protocol, and revealed that destiny wasn't always written in royal commands, but sometimes in the choices we made when everything seemed uncertain. I told her she de-changed me too, teaching me courage in places I didn't know courage existed, and patience in a galaxy that rarely slowed down long enough to offer it. She smiled, a small, almost shy curve of her lips, and the stars reflected in her eyes. For the first time since arriving in the Empire, I felt something like belonging settle quietly in my chest. The Queen's words, the unraveling conspiracy, the silent moment that had started it all, it had led us here, to this strange, unexpected connection between worlds. The night hummed with distant engine trails and the soft pulse of planetary shields, a reminder that the Empire still lived.